Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in a few minutes here. Okay, welcome everybody for joining us today. We're going to get started in about a minute. I think we should go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody today. We're going to begin the program. My name is Renee Bronner. I am a realtor as well as an independent broker and a landlord. This is being recorded, so you can rewatch it or share it with others that may find it useful. Thank you to the co-hosts of today's webinar, St. Louis Realtors, St. Louis Apartment Association, Community Builders Network, Spanish Lake CDC, and Tower Grove Neighborhoods CDC. Due to COVID across the St. Louis region, renters struggle to make rent payments while housing providers struggle. Thanks to the December COVID relief package passed by Congress, states and some local governments have critical funds for rental assistance. Housing providers and renters cannot continue without the relief, and we're grateful that the Missouri legislature and St. Louis City Board of Aldermen and St. Louis County Council all passed legislation to accept these funds. We want to thank the staff that's been working hard to put these programs in place. We're here today to get the word out about how housing providers and renters can access this much needed rental assistance. We will hear from several statewide organizations. Our first presentation is from St. Louis City. We have with us today Valerie Russell, Director, Department of Human Services, and Amy Beckford, Program Manager, DHS Homeless Services Division.
Good morning, and thank you for having us a part of this particular process. It's important to us that we get the word out to individuals who own property or have contact with landlords so that everyone knows what they can do within the city of St. Louis to access these funds on behalf of their residents and the landlords. The city of St. Louis is implementing the ERAP program, having received roughly $8.9 million, 10% of that being set aside to provide for the program operations and administrative cost of our subcontractors. We have 7 subcontractors that we've entered into contracts with to administer the funds, provide the checks to landlords. Those are Doorways, International Institute, the Urban League, Horizon Housing, Mission St. Louis, Salvation Army, and Guardian Angels Settlement. The city of St. Louis is working to handle 2 separate processes concurrently. With the ERAP funds, and I will again use that acronym. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, please let me know. To focus upon 50% or below AMI, meaning individuals whose income is 50% or below will receive assistance from the Treasury funds. If an individual applies for funds and assistance and their income is above the 50%, then we set aside funds from our earlier CARES Act allocation to assist those individuals so that we could prioritize the Treasury funds for persons who were very low income. The funds are going to be utilized for rent, current rent, rental arrears, and if funds are still available for rent moving forward. Other expenses can be incurred, utility bills and utility arrears, and those utilities, as per the Treasury's guidelines, can include gas, water, sewer, trash removal, and other energy costs. The landlords will receive the rental payment checks directly. However, it's our hope that once your tenants notify you that they are applying for assistance, that you assist them to complete those applications in a timely manner. There are landlord verification forms and affidavits that have to be submitted in order for the assistance to be provided, and that deals with the rental arrears and rental moving forward. Also, the documentation of the months that the rent is actually due for. The criteria for an individual being eligible for this is based upon the U.S. Treasury's guidelines. Households, as I said, with incomes less than 50% of the area median income. Households with one or more members that have been unemployed for at least 90 days. In addition, conditions of eligibility include unemployment or reduction in income, risk of experiencing homelessness, household income requirements. What you're going to hear today from other providers is slightly different than the City of St. Louis, in that we had over 2,400 applicants who applied for our CARE funds who were not assisted. We set aside some CARE dollars to assist those individuals who had rent and or mortgage assistance that was needed. So we've got other subcontractors who are assisting individuals who are 80% or above the area median income, and that is with the CARES Act funds. The Treasury funds will go to individuals who are at 50% or below, and we are primarily focusing on those individuals who are in the eviction court docket, so that we can try to assist to the best of our ability to make sure individuals are not evicted. So if landlords have filed evictions in the City of St. Louis and you want your tenants to apply for these funds, we encourage you to communicate with them. And we, as well as the courts and the family courts who are assisting in this process, will make sure they get the applications to be submitted. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Up next, we have MHDC statewide program.
Good morning. My name is Jenny Miller. I'm with Missouri Housing Development Commission. We are the state housing finance agency for the state of Missouri. And today I'm here to present on the Treasury stimulus assistance funding that is coming through the state. We are calling that program the Missouri State Assistance for Housing Relief Program. Next slide. Some of this will be a little repetitive, but I think that's okay, so that people can understand the requirements and what's in the Treasury regulations. So the COVID-19 Economic Relief Bill, or the Consolidated Appropriations Act, was signed on December 27th. That included $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. So the state of Missouri was allocated $408 million in emergency rental assistance. This funding is administered by the U.S. Department of the Treasury. The regulations state that no less than 90% of the funding can be used for rent and utility assistance, and then no more than 10% can be used for housing stability services and administration. Treasury does outline very specific data collection and reporting requirements. So I will preface with the fact that every application and I'm sure that other communities feel this way too, we're only asking information that we are required to ask in the application to be in compliance with those regulations. The funding must be obligated by September 30th, 2021. However, the most recent stimulus plan passed, the American Rescue Plan, does extend the funding authority through September 30, 2022. Treasury has not been clear about updating those obligation timelines, so we are still operating on trying to have our funds obligated by September 30, 2021. So states as well as cities and counties with populations over 200,000 were eligible for an allocation of emergency rental assistance funding. So what that means for the state of Missouri is that the following counties and cities were allowed to apply directly to Treasury for their own allocation of funding. So in the state of Missouri, Clay County, Greene County, Jackson County, Jefferson County, and St. Louis County, and then Kansas City and St. Louis did receive their own allocation of Treasury rental assistance funding. And then the difference is what MHDC is administering. So the state was allocated the $408 million. The cities and counties received their own allocations. So MHDC is administering approximately $320 million of state funds through the State Assistance for Housing Relief Program. So one item that the guidance is very clear on is making sure that grantees prevent a duplication of benefits or a household receiving benefits for the same amount during the same time period. So currently the state allocation of emergency rental assistance funds is not open to the areas that receive their own allocation of funding, but we are collectively working together to put in place a system for us to check to be sure there's not a duplication of benefits. And once that's in place, we do expect to expand and make our state program available in other areas in collaboration with those grantees. So program eligibility. So the program, you know, and St. Louis City referred to, you know, each grantee might have their own preferences and eligibility requirements, but in general for the SAFER program and from the Treasury regulations, households with an income at or below 80% of the area median income are eligible. So that's by county and household size. We do have ways to, on our website that I'll refer to, you can look up to see what level of income you're at for your county and your household size. One or more individual in the household receives unemployment or attests to financial hardship due directly or indirectly to the COVID-19 pandemic. One or more individual in the household demonstrates a risk of homelessness or housing instability. So those are really the three legs of the stool of the program: is income at or below 80% AMI, receiving unemployment or attesting to a financial hardship due to COVID, and then the risk of housing instability. So the Treasury guidance does ask us to prioritize beyond that households with one or more member who's currently unemployed and has been unemployed for the most recent 90 days, and households that are below 50% of the area median income. Next slide. So how to apply for the state SAFER program or state assistance for housing relief. We do have an online tenant application portal right now, and that is to apply for direct financial assistance. Again, that's in collaboration with the landlord. So the landlord will be asked to provide their payment information and a W-9. We did launch our tenant portal on February 15th, 2021. You can find that application portal at mohousingresources.com /SAFER, or mohousingresources.com will take you there. Coming soon, we'll have an online application portal as part of the SAFER program as a whole, and online application portal for landlords with multiple tenants to apply directly for assistance in collaboration with their tenant. we'll be providing an offline application option in the form of a paper application. And we'll be engaging with housing stability case management and legal services providers that will also be able to provide large coverage for folks who might need additional assistance in completing the application or getting connected to housing stability resources. So the SAFER program application, again, if you go to mohousingresources.com, you will find all of the website materials, and you can confirm your eligibility for the program. So at the website, we have instruction manuals and guides on how to apply for the program. Once you click that you are interested in applying, you will create an account. And the first thing that you'll do is certify that the household meets that program criteria. So we don't want you to move forward unless you are sure that you meet all the program criteria. And then the tenant will be asked to complete required information on their household. So household size and information about the primary applicant. They will be asked to provide information on their income. So again, you have to be at or below 80% AMI to qualify for the program. You can provide income documentation in a series of ways in the application. First, it'll ask if you have zero income. If your household has zero income, you can certify that and then move on. If you do have income and you participate in a federally means tested program, you can upload participation in that program, confirmation of that, and you can income qualify that way. If you don't participate in those and you don't have zero income, you'll be asked what your income is for the last 30 days and then annualized. And you'll be asked to provide documentation of that income for the last 60 days. And then if you don't qualify based on the last 30 days of your income, so you were unemployed for most of 2020 due to COVID-19, and then you recently became employed and your last 30 days puts you over income, you can choose to qualify based on your total FY 2020 income and upload your 1040 tax document. So once the tenant has completed their portion of the application, at the end, they will provide their landlord contact information. The landlord will be contacted with a notification that says your tenant has applied for this assistance. Please provide your payment information and your W-9. The tenant is then notified when they've completed that step and they can go in and submit their application. So once you've submitted your application, if there are items that need to be corrected or cured, you will have the opportunity to do that. The application will not be denied. So you would be notified that there are corrections needed and would have 10 days to make those corrections and then resubmit the application. So depending on how many cures one application is needed, it can vary the amount of time from start of application to final approval. The required documentation to be uploaded is the primary applicant's photo ID, the household income documentation, as I said, the zero income attestation, proof of participation in a means tested federal program, supporting income documentation based on the last 30 days, or your 1040 tax form for income based on fiscal year 2020. You will be asked to upload documentation of the past due rent or eviction notice or the utility past due notice. And here's my information. Again, my name is Jenny Miller. You can find all of this information and you can apply at mohousingresources.com. You can email specific application questions to mo.safer@mhdc.com. And one thing that I'll finally mention is that applicants are eligible for up to 12 months of assistance per household for rent and utility assistance. 1 month can include rental arrears and utility arrears for multiple services. So the eligible utilities include electric, water, gas, sewer, trash. So an applicant could potentially apply for up to 9 months of rental arrears, up to 3 months of forward rent, and then utility arrears for multiple services. So as long as they don't exceed that 12-month limit per household, there are multiple things that you can apply for in one application. And with that, I will turn it back to you guys. And again, thank you so much for having us, helping us get the word out. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jenny. We really appreciate your presentation. We're gonna make sure that everybody, please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A so they can get answered. We see a couple of your questions in chat, so just go ahead and make sure you put those in Q&A. We're gonna go up next to St. Louis County, and I'm pleased to introduce Cora Faith Walker, Chief Policy Officer in the Offices of St. Louis County Executive, and Yusuf Skogan, Director of Family and Community Services, who will share about their new program.
Great, thank you so much, Renee. And good morning, everyone. As Renee stated, my name is Cora Faith Walker, and I am the Chief Policy Officer in the Office of the County Executive, Dr. Sam Page. As Renee mentioned earlier, we certainly recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic really represents a significant public health as well as an economic crisis, and really how that impacts housing stability throughout the community. Even before COVID, there were renters and households that were really struggling with housing costs, and the sort of economic outcome of St. Louis, of what's going on with COVID this past year has really just exacerbated a lot of those challenges. We certainly know and appreciate that eviction moratoriums have been in place, and that they've really played a really important role in protecting renters during this pandemic. But, ultimately tenants are still going to be responsible for rent payments that accrue, and landlords still need their rent revenues to maintain their units and really their livelihoods. So, we certainly recognize that this is a challenge. And considering the fact that there's been moratoriums in place for since the beginning of this pandemic, we certainly realize that we have an existing problem and an impending crisis, and why it's really important for us to get these funds out. So I just want to thank the Realtors Association and the Apartment Association and all the partners and sponsors on this call for getting this together, and really the feedback that we've been able to receive from a lot of you in the development of this program. We've learned a lot of lessons the past year. We put about $12 million in CARES funds towards housing stability and homelessness prevention in the past year, and we recognize that wasn't nearly enough to really address the challenge. And so we're really grateful for these funds. I'm grateful for partnerships with the state, with neighboring jurisdictions, and as well as folks that are on this call. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Yusuf Skogan, who is our Director of the Office of Family and Community Services, who will talk a little bit more about St. Louis County's newest emergency rental assistance program, and how very soon folks will be able to access these resources. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cora, and thanks those on the call for tuning in today. This is a critical time for our entire region and state, and in fact, the country. And so we wanted to be very thoughtful in deploying this resources based upon what we've learned over the last year in terms of the way we operated some of our original rental assistance programs, and then how do we focus going forward. Next slide. So I'll just give a little bit of background. I will probably skip over the state program, as Jenny did an illustrious job of detailing that. But we'll talk a little bit about the lessons learned and why St. Louis County is choosing to provide the program in the way that we are. And then I'll get into a little bit more detail, but not be redundant based upon the previous presentations. Next. So we'll get a little bit of background. So next slide. So this was primarily covered by Jenny when it talks about the legislation that authorized said funds, the $25 billion. Who is it to be focused on? St. Louis County was one of the opt-in communities that elected to administer our resources directly. We received directly approximately $29.735 million for assistance for county residents. And that is the program that I'm presenting on today. We know that these resources are going to be helpful, but we know that they're not going to be sufficient. And so to that end, we're working with the state to ensure that access to those resources are available. We expect the exhaustion of these resources to come in very short order. Next slide. The eligibility is primarily the same. Most are adopting the same format. The federal government regulates that those at 80% of AMI or less are eligible for said funds, those who are experiencing housing instability and hardship, and prioritizing those who have had the last 3 months of unemployment and or are 50% or lower of AMI. Those are critical populations to focus on. Pre-pandemic, this was the same population that was most likely to be evicted or suffer from housing instability. And just from general context standpoint, most of our operations during the pandemic have recognized the historical issues as well as some of the current issues that were exacerbated under the pandemic as to how we formulated our program. Next slide. So just give a little context again. Cora mentioned the 12 million or so dollars that's been spent between housing, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and utility assistance under the CARES Act dollars that we utilized last year. That was a great success, but again, the $12 million, although it sounds like a decent amount of money, was not sufficient. And so specifically around rental and mortgage assistance, we had approximately $7 million or so. And we had an overwhelming number of applicants, so over 5,000 applicants. And when it came down to it, due to the period of time into which they were applying for the assistance, it averaged to a little less than $2,000 per household in assistance. These funds certainly helped to stabilize those households. But again, we had a number of individuals, just as Valerie Russell from the city of St. Louis mentioned, who did apply under those CARES Act dollars, who unfortunately, due to the exhaustion of said funds, were not able to be assisted. So we do have a group of individuals who have applied already, who we anticipate will still be assisted with this fund going forward. One of the key elements of the program as operated last year was to ensure that we got feedback about lessons learned, what worked, what didn't. And this was feedback that we got from the 26 organizations that were funded to operate within our community. Those organizations not only provided the direct assistance, case management, and other supports, negotiating with landlords and working with landlords to ensure that housing stability could be achieved. But these were some of the pieces of feedback. Certainly, we wanted to ensure that there is a streamlined process for reimbursement. Tying up the money for long periods of time or delays in that certainly would be a challenge moving forward. So that's something we wanted to take really note of. We wanted to minimize the level of documentation that might be required. Certainly, this is federal funding, so there's some things that we can't get around. However, to the extent possible, we want to minimize the burden both to tenants and to landlords to ensure that we can expedite the overall supports that are necessary. Again, we wanted to standardize the process, ensuring that there was no differentiation between different operators. We wanted to make sure everyone was consistent in the way that these programs were operating. when we were thinking about this next iteration, this emergency rental assistance program we're speaking about today, that's one of the main reasons why Jenny at MHDC, Valerie in the city of St. Louis, and other partners have been in constant dialogue so that we could make sure that we had some synergy to make the process less arduous. We wanted to make sure that information was being shared in a multilingual fashion. And we have, particularly in our urban communities, great diversity in cultural and ethnic backgrounds. And so this next application will provide for that level of diversification. Again, this issue of self-navigation, it makes it much more efficient for all involved if individuals are able to determine where the application is in the process, both from a landlord perspective and a tenant perspective, and what information they need to still upload. Operating with various organizations, sometimes that becomes challenging and burdensome if there are multiple calls and not a centralized system in which people can self-navigate and learn about their application. And then ultimately, more resources and more overall continuity of the way the program was operating in the community was important. And so Jenny at MHDC had mentioned the support of legal advocacy as well as case management in various communities. And so the coordination of said efforts across the entire state, particularly in St. Louis County as well, as it's a large geography with the most populous county in the state of Missouri, it's extraordinarily important to support these households. Next slide. I'll skip over the state program, so we'll probably skip the next 2 slides. I just wanted to go more specifically into our CARES Act program, our REAP program here in the county. Again, some of the same eligibility criteria that was mentioned by Jenny are listed here. Rental arrears, prospective rent, meaning rent going forward, as well as utilities are allowable. There has been some guidance from the federal government about the issue of the issue of internet services. And while we recognize that is an issue of equity in our community, we are not funding that through our program at present. However, we have separate funds that we will be connecting folks to support those household needs as we anticipate some of these very households, their children being educated through the summer months may need that internet service. And as we recognize that is a vital need during the pandemic. Next slide. Program implementation. So everyone wants to know, when is it alive? So as of next Monday, March 29th, our call center will launch. We are in partnership. We are utilizing a third party to support us, an organization named Nan McKay. And Nan McKay is very experienced in this sort of work. They have a centralized platform as well as an interconnected payment process that will help to streamline this effort. The hours of operation at present for the call center will be Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. There may be adjustments in the future, and we will let everyone know if that is the case. Secondarily, on April 5th, the online platform will be made available. And it appears that this slide is incorrect. Maybe the most recent and updated PowerPoint did not make its way to you, but it is www.saintlouisco.onlinepha.com. So don't forget the CO after St. Louis. And that also, in addition to the stlcorona.com website, are both places in which you can be linked to the application and further information about the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Next slide. Again, our key element here is to not forget about those who have expressed needs and a level of support that's required months ago. And so that's many of those who applied under the CARES Act fund that was supported last year are still in need. And so we will be focusing on that group most immediately. and ensuring that also those who are interfacing with the court system are addressed as well. There will be information provided, as was the case under the CARES Act, with all summons. So your tenant should be made aware automatically if there is an eviction filing for them, as well as landlords. You will be made aware at the time that your attorney or yourself makes the filing about the resources being available. This is extraordinarily important. This is a community working together. We know that the Realtors Association and your partner and stakeholder groups are extraordinarily important to ensuring that our community is made whole. It is very difficult for our households to re-engage another apartment or home in which to reside if they have an eviction on their history. So I would ask that you give it a chance for these supports to be provided to these households while we work through some of the challenging and unprecedented times that have been brought forward to us subject to the pandemic. To that end, we're looking at this in a very holistic manner. We recognize that many folks are suffering hardship because of loss of income, either due to loss of hours or loss of their job completely. And so we're working with our Workforce Development Department, which is in the Department of Human Services, to ensure that those households who are assisted are also referred to workforce opportunities. This is extraordinarily important, not just for the short term, but for the long run, so that these tenants can stay stable, can provide for their families, and ultimately can ensure that their rent is paid. We are recognizing that there are a number of units within our community that have high levels of evictions. And so we are monitoring that for more direct outreach to some of those apartment complexes. And for those who are on this call that are aware of those, we ask that you reach out and you apply. Ensure that the owners, the management companies are aware of this resource. Next slide. This last slide, which would be the next one, just provides additional resources for anyone that is wanting to learn a little bit more about some of the nuances behind the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, some of the latest guidance that is being issued. These funds, as well as other funds that are to come, are constantly being evaluated. Further guidance is being provided. And so I recommend that you take a look at these websites as there are adjustments being made. With that being said, that is all I have for today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Yusuf. That's been amazing information. We really do appreciate you coming on today. With that, I'm also going to thank all of the presenters today for sharing their critical programs. And we all are so appreciative that you guys made the time to do this today. And remember next that we're going to do Q&A with all of the presenters. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A section, please. Up next, we have Charlie Hendeliter from St. Louis Realtors, Director of Government Affairs, who will moderate the Q&A. Over to you, Charlie.
Renee, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. So let's start with a question. We've gotten a few different questions about who can apply in terms of geography. So Jenny, let's throw it to you. If it's somebody in St. Louis County, whether that's Chesterfield or Afton or wherever, if it's somebody in St. Louis City, if it's somebody in St. Charles, who's eligible geographically and where do they go to apply?
Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned, Treasury came out with this funding and made available to communities with 200,000 or more in their population. They had the ability to apply directly as well. So those communities that did that on this side, St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and Jefferson County do have their own allocation of Treasury funds. Our state allocation is currently not serving in those areas, but we are working with each of those grantees to establish a process and procedure of ensuring that we're not making a duplication of benefits while serving in each other's areas. And as soon as we do have that set up, we expect to soon make available the state program in those areas as well.
Perfect. So next question is for anybody, and my apologies. The folks from the city of St. Louis had to drop off the call. They had another webinar about this exact topic that they had to get to with their service provider. So we've had in the chat and in Q&A some folks that have expressed some frustration in terms of getting through the process, whether that was the CARES Act or now the new programs. What are resources? Where can they go to find help as they try to navigate this process?
Yes, so that is some of the feedback that we received from our prior operation of the CARES Act, and that was the reason why we wanted a centralized process. When there are operations happening all over the place, potentially operating very differently, that makes it very difficult to navigate. Secondarily, not having a system in which you're able to check exactly the status of your application, what is outstanding, et cetera, is extraordinarily important. And then I would say, lastly, trying to navigate the differentiation between funding here or funding there and what's eligible here versus what's eligible there was also a problem. And so I think that's why this time around, the state, the city, the county have been in dialogue for months now. Really, I guess it feels like months. Maybe more like a day. It's been blowing past so quick, but we've been working together to ensure there's some alignment on these matters, so that it makes it much easier for folks to navigate. What I would say is that if there's difficulty applying for these funds online, there is an opportunity to apply over the phone. So that's the purpose of our call-in center, is to provide that for those who have difficulty navigating online or don't have internet service. And so we will also be secondarily working with those partner organizations that are being funded for case management and otherwise by MHDC here locally in St. Louis County. And so to that end, we believe that there will be some coverage that affords all an opportunity to apply without a significant challenge.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Maria. Is this assistance for periods that were unemployed prior to the current date, and some people that previously were unemployed but fell behind on their obligations and can't seem to catch up?
Yes. So for the piece of the priority, we're asking if you're currently unemployed and have been unemployed, but that doesn't affect eligibility. If you were previously unemployed and aren't currently unemployed, that is just a federal priority that we are tracking separately. But you do have multiple ways of qualifying for the program, being under that 80% of the area median income, whether it's your income based on the last 30 days or it's your income based on all of FY 2020.
We've also had a couple of questions about those utility. Oh, sorry, Yusuf, please go ahead.
So considering we're operating pretty much the same program, we'd say ditto to that.
Very good. So we've had a couple of questions about utility payments. Is that something that when the landlord and the tenant are putting this application together, does that go in there, or is that something separate that the tenant has to do themselves if they're dealing directly with those utilities?
So for the state application for the SAFER program, you can apply for rent and utilities in the same tenant initiated application. When we do launch our landlord portal, that will only be for rental assistance, and the tenant would have to apply for utilities separately.
And our process will be the same. And for those payments, they will go directly to the utility provider. We have been in consultation with the utility providers to ensure that there is also some collaboration in the funding that they have available. Under the recently passed legislation, there's increase in LIHEAP dollars as well. And we want to ensure that that is maximized in the community, as there aren't many other options for rental assistance, generally speaking. But we want to support both.
Someday I'll figure out that I need to unmute myself. Another question, applications previously submitted that are waiting on approval or folks that have previously applied for CARES Act funds. We've got a couple of questions on those. Can they be revised to add future months in rent payments? And for those that have already applied for one program, are they still eligible to apply for another?
Yes, they are eligible to apply for the assistance. So those who were already in the queue or those who previously applied and still need assistance, those who are still in the queue have yet to receive assistance. Those are the folks who are prioritizing and working with to ensure that they receive the assistance needed. For those who previously obtained assistance under the CARES Act and have been satisfied in that regard, but have fallen behind again, they can apply for these dollars going forward. The key element, however, is that they can only apply for the months that were not already covered. So this kind of goes to Jenny's earlier point about duplication. So the months for which assistance was provided, we will be tracking internally and as well as across the state to ensure that there's no duplication there.
So next question, will residents that receive Section 8 or housing choice vouchers be eligible for the emergency rental assistance programs?
Yes, so Treasury has released a series of frequently asked questions since they came out with their original regulations, and they did address this. Anyone being served with another housing subsidy or is receiving other assistance with a voucher is eligible as long as they're only applying for the tenant portion of the rent. So again, they can only apply for the tenant portion of the rent, and most agreements will state what that is.
Ditto.
All right, we've got another question specifically regarding attorney's fees. Are attorney's fees something that are eligible under the ERAP program?
We have a request for proposals out right now for housing stability services. We are looking for agencies that provide case management and or legal services. So we anticipate in the future working with legal services agencies that would be interested in providing eviction prevention services through some of those housing stability, case management, and legal services funds.
And nothing further to add there. We want to make sure that folks are made whole. I would ask that those who are working with tenants who have fallen behind prior to filing, prior to engaging an attorney, please make sure that your tenant and or yourself is applying for the back rent. It saves everybody if there aren't additional fees being added unnecessarily.
I would add to that, I just heard that question in another way as I was thinking about it. And so these funds are only for rent and utility assistance on behalf of the tenant. And then those housing stability services would be paid directly to agencies doing that work. So a tenant could not receive assistance to pay for any of their legal costs.
If someone has already been evicted, is that something where the landlord and I guess at this point former tenant can still apply, or is that no longer available to those folks?
So under the SAFER program, so no matter how you structure this Treasury program, there has to be some sort of collaboration between the landlord and the tenant. So if it's a tenant initiated application, the landlord's going to have to provide some information. If it's a landlord initiated application, the tenant is going to have to sign off on that and be part of that application. And so if somebody has already been evicted, they can apply for their rental arrears that they owed. The landlord is just going to have to, they're going to have to be in touch with them still to provide the required information. And then if a landlord was helping a tenant apply for arrears, they could do that. And if the tenant was applying for a previous address where they had been evicted and they're trying to receive assistance for those rental arrears, they can also then apply for up to 3 months of forward rent at a different address. Just wanted to add that.
We've had a few questions that center around who applies. I believe you mentioned that landlords can apply, but they need the tenant's participation there. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that looks like?
So for the SAFER program, currently we have the tenant portal open, but when the landlord portal opens, the Treasury regulations do require that the tenant sign off on the landlord application, and the landlord will have to provide certain information from the tenant as far as those items we discussed earlier. So income, housing instability, and the COVID tieback of being directly or indirectly impacted by COVID. And so the landlord would have to work with their tenant to obtain that information to ensure that that tenant is eligible under federal regulation to be served with those funds. And so it is helpful for the tenant and landlord to know that, to gather that information together, or to at least be aware that the application is in process.
At this point, do you have any estimate from how long it takes from application until the funds will be deployed? How long until they get the checks?
So certainly the submission of documentation will determine a lot. Ultimately, we have a window of time in which the first review will be within 7 days of the application submission. If there's anything outstanding, it will alert those involved, give another 7 days for that to be completed. So there's a 14-day window there. And then if the application is still incomplete, there will be a period of time in which they can appeal and make sure that that application is still active. What we want to do is make sure that nobody falls into that space of their application having to be resubmitted or becoming inactive. So to the degree that people can coordinate and be on the same page about applying for these dollars up front, that would help out quite a bit.
So in the SAFER application, like I said, there is opportunity to cure or correct items. So depending on how many items might need to be corrected, the time of submission to approval could be very different for each applicant. And so, in a perfect world, if you submitted your application, it was reviewed within 2 to 3 days and found to be approved and moved forward, we anticipate payment within the next few weeks. And I do see a quick comment below about, the funds are meant to keep people in place. And that is absolutely correct. These funds are meant to stably house people, to prevent them from homelessness. However, there are situations where folks have rental arrears in a unit they're no longer in, and it is preventing them from becoming stably housed. And so we want to be able to serve those households as well.
We've had a couple of questions about mortgage assistance in addition to rental assistance. Is that covered under this program, or is that something that's separate from this?
That is separate. In the American Rescue Plan that was just signed into law, it does provide funding for homeowner assistance. And so I would tell people to keep watching. Those funds have not come to the state at this time, but it was approved in that legislation.
And I would just,
all right, and my apologies, we have sorry, go ahead, Yusuf.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what Jenny said, particularly as it relates to housing stability for the question in the chat. Certainly those, we want to keep folks in the place, but there's also circumstances under which the unit that they were in was unsafe for them in which to reside. And so we want to make sure that people are stably housed in units that are occupiable by their family.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We have a host of questions that unfortunately we weren't able to get to. This will be posted on St. Louis Realtors YouTube channel. We will send that link out to everybody afterwards. And we will try to include some contact information and web links to the different programs so that if you want to share that with tenants, landlords, with anybody that needs to get that information out there, we want to make sure that this assistance gets into the hands of those that need it. So we appreciate everybody joining us today. And I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but hopefully we can at least get through the resources to find the answers that you're looking for. And Renee, I'll turn it back over to you to close us.
Again, as Charlie said, we want to thank you guys for attending today, as well as all of our presenters. The video today for the program and resources shared today will be posted online, will be available through all of our co-hosts today. And we want to give a big thanks and a big shout out to St. Louis Realtors, St. Louis Apartment Association, Community Builders Network, Spanish Lake CDC, and Tower Grove Network CDC. Thank you to Cora Faith Walker for suggesting this webinar. It's been so informative, and I know that all of our attendees have walked away a lot smarter about what's going on with the region right now. And thanks again to all our speakers this morning. And this is going to conclude our program. Everybody, please make sure to look out for those links to the recording, as well as the information to share the links to people that you know who are landlords and our tenants, to make sure that we can keep St. Louis City and County safe, and make sure that we can keep people housed. Thank you all today, and we will look forward to talking to you soon.